Trump is back in the headlines again, but this time he's not just shaking up trade. He's promising to send cash straight to your wallet. In case you missed it, President Donald Trump teased the idea of sending out tariff rebates, or as many are already calling them, tariff stimulus checks. And here's what's happening. Over the past several months, Trump has imposed massive tariffs on imports, particularly from China and parts of Europe, as part of his broader trade policy. And despite controversy over potential price increases on goods like cars, appliances, and everyday products, these tariffs have generated a huge pile of money. Approximately $500 billion according to recent estimates. But now Trump's suggesting an unprecedented step, redistributing that money back to the Americans directly. It's a pretty bold strategy, and naturally there's a lot of speculation on how this could work, if it could work, and more importantly, how much money are we even talking about? First, let's do the math. If the US government actually collected about $500 billion from these tariffs, and Trump wanted to rebate this money directly to Americans, the simplest way would be through something similar to the stimulus checks during the pandemic. Checks sent straight to your mailbox or deposited directly into your bank account via ACH. Now right now, there's roughly 100 income caps, so if he followed kind of the previous scheme from the last round of stimulus checks, maybe it'd be something like $200,000 a year for individuals and $400,000 for married couples. And that would narrow down the number of eligible recipients considerably. Based on recent IRS data, approximately 90% of taxpayers make less than $200,000 annually. That would reduce the number of recipients to around 153 million taxpayers. So let's take that $500 billion in tariff revenue, divide it by those 153 million eligible taxpayers. Doing that math, we could be looking at stimulus checks of roughly $3,270 per eligible taxpayer, not per household, per person. Now, obviously that figure is pretty speculative, but it gives you an idea of just how substantial the tariff rebate could be. Imagine getting over $3,000 out of nowhere. Now, this is money that could pay off debt, which they should be doing with government debt, but it could cover rent, it could go straight in your savings. But let's step back for a second. The Trump tariff proposal, it's more than just a headline-grabbing idea. It's actually a very clever political maneuver. Tariffs generally raise prices on imported goods, meaning consumers often pay more at the store. But returning tariff money directly back to Americans, Trump could effectively offset those price increases and make the tariffs more politically palatable. It's almost like he's giving you a refund on the money that you already spent. Critics argue that these tariffs could hurt the economy long-term by raising costs for businesses and consumers, which could lead to higher inflation and slower economic growth. Plus, not every dollar collected through tariffs is new money. Some of it just comes out of consumers' pockets when they buy imported products. Additionally, there are logistical hurdles to sending out checks this large. In previous stimulus rounds, it took weeks or even months for all the checks to reach each of the taxpayers. Also, Congress typically controls spending, meaning Trump would face fierce opposition in actually getting approval to send out these checks in the first place, even if the money is technically already collected. It's already captured public attention, and it could significantly reshape the narrative around Trump's controversial tariffs, especially for people who are short-sighted. Historically, when consumers hear about tariffs, they mostly think of trade wars, higher prices, and international tensions. But now when people hear tariffs, Trump wants them to think free money for everyone. And beyond the politics and logistics, we also need to talk about how this kind of stimulus might impact everyday life. When stimulus checks went out during the pandemic, they had measurable effects on consumer behavior. Retail spending spiked, debt repayments increased, and many people even invest in the stock market or in cryptocurrencies and poo coins. Could we see something similar here? If millions of Americans suddenly receive a substantial rebate, it's entirely possible that we could see another temporary surge in consumer spending and investment activity. We could also see a huge spike in inflation. However, the scenario might also bring unintended consequences. Last time the stimulus checks flooded the economy, we saw asset prices spike, particularly in areas like housing, cars, and stocks, equities. Economists warn that a sudden influx of cash might inflate prices again, making it harder for people, especially first-time home buyers and those already struggling, to afford major purchases. Another dimension worth considering is how businesses would respond. Some companies might raise prices ahead of time, knowing that consumers are going to have some extra cash in their pockets, essentially neutralizing the benefit of the rebate entirely. Now, we saw examples of this during the pandemic, when prices on certain goods, like electronics and used cars, they surged almost immediately after the stimulus checks arrived. It's also important to consider what else could be done with the $500 billion. Rather than sending checks directly to taxpayers, the government could use the tariff revenue to reduce the national debt, invest in infrastructure, or even cut taxes over the long term. While direct stimulus checks provide an immediate short-term boost, these other alternatives, they might deliver more sustainable economic benefits in the long run. And public opinion on direct stimulus payments is typically favorable, but it's not universally agreed upon. We saw some very negative consequences last go around. A recent poll showed that 70% of Americans support receiving another stimulus check. Yay, free things. But concerns about inflation, government debt, they're becoming prominent. As inflation remains a hot button issue, any proposal involving sending out hundreds of billions of dollars will inevitably draw both excitement and criticism. Would every eligible taxpayer get the same amount, regardless of need or personal circumstances, or how much taxes they pay? Or would there be additional conditions? Past stimulus checks kind of had phase-out benefits, where payments gradually decreased above certain income thresholds. If this approach is chosen again, some middle-class households might see smaller payments than initially expected. In addition, this rebate idea is already fueling political debate ahead of the upcoming election. Democrats and Republicans alike will need to address their stance on direct payments and trade policy. And Trump's announcement, it could force this issue into the spotlight. Politicians who oppose the rebates might face backlash from voters who want free money, while supporters might need to justify the potential inflationary risks. Something else worth mentioning is how other countries might react to these tariffs. Nations like China, Europe, and Canada have often responded with retaliatory tariffs when the US has increased their duties. And if other countries respond again, it could trigger a new trade war, which we're already we're encroaching on that territory. And it creates uncertainty for American businesses that export goods overseas. While Americans might enjoy getting rebate checks initially, businesses that rely heavily on exports could suffer as a result, possibly impacting jobs, economic stability, and certain sectors. Finally, we should consider the timing. If the checks are seriously proposed, timing could make a huge difference. If checks arrive right before the holiday shopping season, we could see a dramatic surge in retail spending. But if distribution gets delayed into a quieter economic period, the impact might be less pronounced. And this timing could also have implications for political outcomes, possibly some voter sentiment right before the midterm elections that are coming up. Ultimately, whether Trump's tariff rebates become reality will hinge on numerous political, economic, and logistical factors. Even if this specific proposal never sees the light of day, it's reignited a crucial national conversation about tariffs, about stimulus checks, and about economic policy at a critical time. There's no doubt that Trump's announcement was strategically timed. Inflation remains high. Consumer confidence, it's on the decline. And the economy feels uncertain. The idea of a significant financial rebate right now, it's politically savvy. It immediately grabs your attention. It builds excitement. And it places pressure on both political parties to respond. If Trump can rally enough public support, he might force lawmakers into action, even if they're initially reluctant. Now, one last thing to consider is how the tariff rebate could affect inflation. Some economists argue that injecting hundreds of billions of dollars directly into the economy, it could push prices higher. Others contend that redistributing tariff revenue is economically neutral since the money is already circulating in the economy, but there's a genuine debate here if it's worth following closely. Either way, whether this idea becomes reality or simply stays a political theater, it's already impacting the public perception. Millions of Americans are now considering the prospect of getting unexpected cash from the government. Money that can make a real difference in their financial lives. We'll be following this story very closely because whether or not the checks start hitting your bank account, the tariffs and rebates and stimulus and spending, it's all heating up. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below telling me what you think. Do you think this is a good use of our money, or do you think we should pay down the national debt? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.